Welcome. This is JD Roth, and this is the first of what I hope will be many interviews that I conduct with some of my favorite people. And today, the very first person I'm talking to is Leo Babauta. And Leo writes a blog called Zen Habits, which is at zenhabits.net. It's a great site for figuring out or learning about how to make improvements with your life and just how to live a better life. Leo and I, we've been coming up in the blogging world together. We've been colleagues for a long time, and as I say, he's one of my favorite people. And so I'm really pleased to have him as the first person I talk to in this, what I hope will be an ongoing series. So Leo, to start, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you came to write Zen Habits?
Sure. And what an honor to be the first one in the series. And an honor to be here with you, JD. I don't know if your audience knows, but you were one of the big inspirations for Zen Habits when I was going to my background, when I was struggling with a lot of things in my life. In 2005 is when I started to make some changes. In 2006, I believe you're around in 2006, right?
Yeah, I started in April of 2006.
Yeah, so in the middle of trying to make all these changes in my life, I started reading Get Rich Slowly. And it was a profound influence on me. So but backing up a little bit, I was stuck in not only in debt, but with really bad habits. I was a smoker. I was overweight. I couldn't start an exercise program or stick to a diet to save my life, to literally save my life. I was overworked and stressed, a lot of clutter, not enough time for my kids. You know, I'm married with 6 kids. I was living on Guam at the time in a job I didn't like, and really didn't know how to make any kind of changes stick. I knew I wanted to change. I really wanted to, and I tried a bunch of times, but it was really difficult for me to stick to anything.
I was going to say real quick, that sounds a lot like my background, to be honest, because as you know, I've really struggled with changes, trying to make changes too, and wanting to be somebody different. And you know, I was deep in debt, 50 pounds overweight, unhappy with my job,
Yep.
and there were a lot of changes that need to be made. So what did you do? I mean, how did you fix some of these problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a bad place, and that's really who I'm trying to reach, is people who were in that place and don't know what to do. So what I finally figured out that what worked was to start with one small change. One change. I was trying to change everything at once, and that never worked. So I'm like, okay, that's not working. Let's try something else. So it was one small change, one at a time, and I just slowly over the course of a year, I changed my entire life. So that really showed me the power of small changes. I actually started with a big change, and that was probably a mistake. It was quitting smoking, which is a really hard habit to change. But I was able to stick with it because I tried a lot of different things to make that habit stick, and I was really motivated. I made a promise to my wife, promise to my daughter, and I'm like, I'm going to make this work.
So, and what was it that you say you tried a bunch of different things? What was it that ultimately helped you stop smoking? Was it a variety of things, or was it one thing?
It was a variety of things. Learning about triggers, the things that triggered the habit of smoking, and learning to replace those with more positive ways of coping with the needs that smoking was fulfilling. For example, stress relief, comfort when I was feeling bad, things like that. So I learned about triggers and replacement habits. I learned about accountability and having support and reaching out to that support when I needed it. And I also learned how to watch my urges. And this was my kind of how I started getting into mindfulness, was I would sit there and I would see this urge arising to smoke, and it would be so hard, and I really wanted to smoke. But normally I would just follow that urge, and same thing following an urge to eat or to compulsively shop, you know, all these different things. They're all the same thing, but you just follow them mindlessly. But I started to watch them, and I realized that I don't actually need to follow the urge. I can watch it, and it's this rising feeling of panic, and like I need to go do it, but it goes away, and it just kind of goes up, and then it crests, and it goes down.
So sometimes mindfulness itself is enough, is what you're saying.
Mindfulness of watching that urge. And then also the other thing was I was mindfully watching my mind rationalize why I should go and do that.
Well, okay, so right now, one thing that I struggle with, and I've written about this before, is I like to drink. I like a glass of wine. Kim likes a glass of wine. And so over the past couple of months, since early September actually, we've tried to do things where instead of drinking, we replace that urge with something else. And some of that means having club soda in the fridge. Sometimes when the urge strikes, I'll just go for a walk instead. And so I like this idea of habit replacement.
Yeah, and that you have to. It's hard to kind of parse out what that habit is doing for you. There's different needs. So sometimes it's comfort, stress relief. Sometimes it's socializing. Smoking did that for me as well.
Yeah.
And drinking, maybe it's something you socialize with friends or with your wife or girlfriend, and that's kind of the thing that you share together. And so just cutting it out leaves this gaping hole. Like, what are you going to do instead? So going for a walk, I think, is a good thing. Maybe having a new ritual where you drink, warm tea together in the cold November weather.
Yeah, that's what we did last weekend. Is we made tea instead.
Yeah. And so what happens is the urge comes up, the trigger, which is like the need for something, comes up, and the urge comes up, and now you, instead of doing the thing you don't want to do, you're going to do a new thing. But it takes a while for that to become as habitualized as the drinking has become.
Right.
So that's another thing I learned. It was to stick to one change for a while until it became more habitualized, and then I could move on to the next thing.
Okay.
And so over the course of 2006, I changed my entire life. I lost a lot of weight. I ran my first marathon.
Nice.
I was starting to get out of debt and making a lot of headway. I reduced a lot of clutter. And then I started Zen Habits in 2007. Yeah, so that was the start of Zen Habits, and it's obviously grown quite a lot from that point in January 2007. But so have I. I've grown to learn not only about habit change, but about becoming happy with myself.
Right.
Not be so kind of goal-oriented, but still be able to achieve things. Learned a lot more about mindfulness, and so I'm pouring all of that now into a new book, which that I'm just finishing up today, actually.
Today? That's awesome.
I actually struggled with this book, but the book is about struggles. And so it's good that I struggled with the book because I needed to learn from that struggle. One thing that I did that was really fun in the beginning was I got a group of 10 people together, and they were my alpha testers. And so I actually started writing the book for them. As they gave me their problems and their life situations, I started writing it for them, and then they would put it into action, and I would give them some accountability, and they would give me feedback, and I'd be like, oh, I didn't see this, and I started writing for that.
And so would they tell you what works and what doesn't work?
Yeah, or what they didn't quite agree with, or what they didn't get. And so I saw all these gaps in my writing, and that really helped me to fill out this book. Because, obviously in your head it sounds great, and then, you write it in a book, and then you put it out in the bookstores, and then that's it. But with this process, I was able to get feedback and really fill in a lot of the things that I didn't realize I needed to fill in. So that was my first part. And then I wrote this book as this kind of grand philosophical Zen book that was going to help people through all their hard times.
What do you mean by that, like a philosophical Zen book?
Well, I wanted to get to the heart. I've been studying Zen Buddhism. I'm not a Zen priest or even a Buddhist, really. In the full sense of the word, but I've been studying it because a lot of the ideas there help me, the practical ideas. I'm not so much of a spiritual guy, but I'm a very practical guy. And so if you tell me do A, B, and C, and I try those things and it works, I'm like, well, that's a really useful idea. So I pull those ideas out. I've been studying Zen, and some of the most important things about Zen is understanding the nature of life as change. So everything in life, including ourselves, is changing.
Yeah,
our relationships with people, our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with our health and our money and all this stuff. It's constantly changing. And so that actually induces fear in people. What we want is some kind of stability. We want things to stay in our comfort zone.
Yeah.
When things change, we get an illness, we lose a job, or even small things like plans get disrupted or someone interrupts us. That causes this frustration or anxiety or fear. And so what I've learned is that this is at the root of everything, from our procrastination to when we want to write, to our habit changes, to our money problems. Is there's this fear at the root of all of everything, and at the root of the fear is this frustration with change. And if we can learn instead of resisting the change, to embrace the change and to see it as a good thing, and see that this is the nature of life and the nature of ourselves, then we can be more at peace with things. And that's not to say that we're just going to accept things and sit back and just not do anything, but it's like starting from a place of peace, and now we can have a mindful, peaceful relationship with people. start to write in peace.
A lot of times, I'm going to use an extreme example. You
Sure.
have people who stay in unhealthy relationships, perhaps even abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found, from my reading, from my own experience, that a lot of times people stay in these relationships precisely because they are afraid of change.
Right.
It's the better the devil you know than the devil you don't type thing.
Right.
And so, from my own experience, I discovered that a lot of times when I actually embrace the change and make the leap and take the risk, the change is so much better. And we think that it's not going to be because it's uncomfortable. We're comfortable. We know what our life is like. And so making the change, it seems scary.
Right.
But
I mean, some of the book is about acceptance. So you could say, I want to accept. I mean, the misinterpretation of that situation is I'm going to accept that this person is abusive and accept them as they are and just accept my fate. That's not what this book is about. It's about accepting the nature of change and realizing, if this is a harmful thing, you might accept this person for who they are, but also realize they're a harmful person to be with.
Right.
And so this relationship is harmful to you. And so then accepting the nature of change also means you can embrace a new change, which means a new you. And this is one of the things is we have this identity of like, I'm in this relationship with this guy who loves me. Yes, he hits me, but he loves me.
Yeah.
And this identity is something you actually grow to like, is like this, I am in a relationship with someone who loves me.
And
getting out of this relationship, that means you're no longer that person. Mm-hmm. You're now the person who is alone and maybe not with anyone who loves them. And that's hard to accept. So that's kind of the acceptance process, accepting that there can be a new you, and that can be just as good or even better.
And you know what I would say, Leo, is I'm really big on trying to get people to be as true to who they are as possible. And that can be a tough thing because who are you? It's tough to know sometimes who you are.
Yeah.
But I think that in my own instance anyway, I'm very aware when I'm doing things that go against my nature and when I'm acting in ways that aren't true to myself. And so I'm going to pull a book off the bookshelf here.
All right.
Since this is the first video interview I'm doing, and I'm going to do many more, I'm sure this book will come up again and again. But this book is called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by a guy named Harry Brown. And so this book, which was published in 1973, has been profound. It's probably the most important book that I've read as far as helping me learn to change, but change in a way that's true to myself so that I don't have to change to adapt to different situations or to adapt to be somebody different for different people, but just be myself as often as possible.
Yeah, and I think you walk the walk. You are as authentic as anyone that I know online. So
Thanks.
that's it's really inspiring to see that, and I think it gives people courage to, that they can be themselves and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
To admit their vulnerabilities, which I think you're really good at. Admit that you're not perfect, and we have this tendency to want to show the perfect side of us, right?
That's actually what I just wrote down. I've been taking notes as we go along, and about 5 minutes ago I wrote down, we are not perfect. And that's something I wanted to chat with you briefly. I know this is a digression, but
it's good.
I feel like a lot of times, you were talking about how people online, self-help people, sometimes they don't seem genuine or like they're not real. And for me, that's a real struggle because you and I, we are just people. We make mistakes. We struggle with things. And yet at the same time, we're trying to write and encourage people to make positive changes. And how do we get people to trust us that we know what we're talking about when we still make mistakes here and there? But I think the important thing to recognize is that everyone's going to make mistakes. Even though I try to walk the walk as far as personal finance is concerned, I'm still learning things along the way, and I'm still making mistakes. And I'm willing to wager that you're not perfect either.
I am perfect.
Oh, there you go.
In a different sense of the word. No, I make mistakes. I struggle. Like I said, I struggled with this book, writing it. I deal with the same things everyone else deals with on a day-to-day basis, and I'm definitely not perfect. I don't follow my own advice. That's the dirty secret of self-help type books and blogs is no one follows all of their own advice all the time. And when we do, it's great.
What I always say is the things that we're writing about are the things that we struggle with most. I write about fear because I struggle with fear and self-doubt all the time, and that's why I write about it.
Absolutely. And when we find something that succeeds, we're like so excited because we
Yeah.
finally found something that works and we want to share it with everybody.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, you know what? And I think that trust that you said, I don't think people actually trust people who come off as perfect. I think we trust people who are vulnerable and who are willing to share the good and the bad because
Yeah.
that's real, and we want to make a connection with someone who's real, and we can't connect with someone who's plastic and perfect because that's not a real thing. This actually relates a lot to what I'm writing about in the book, which
Hmm.
is these ideals that we have. So we idealize these people that we read about online, and sometimes that ideal can get in the way. So yeah, if you want to make real true change, these ideals that we have of how perfect our life is going to be once we make these changes, uh, that's not real. I mean, you've made a whole bunch of changes in your life, but your life
Yeah.
isn't perfect. You're still
No, no, no.
struggling.
And it's much better. It's absolutely much, much better than it was a decade ago or 5 years ago, even.
Right,
There's still stuff that I want to improve.
right. So I mean, people have this ideal of what they're going to get to, and then when they start making the change, if they get to that ideal and it's not what they thought it was, then they
Yeah.
become disappointed or frustrated. Like, why isn't my life like so much better than I thought it was going to be? And then the other thing is the change itself. If you start, if you say, "Oh, I'm going to quit drinking and my life is going to be great and I'm going to be slim and just free of all of that stuff and full of Zen," then you start doing it and it's like way harder than you idealized. You can get discouraged and quit the change because it's not what you thought it was going to be. So
Yeah.
this ideal of what this change is going to be often can get in the way. And so what I am teaching people to do is to see that this ideal is actually the thing stopping you, and to kind of let go of it and start to accept the reality that's in front of you. And that's a hard thing to do.
So I'm not clear exactly what you mean there by let go of the
Okay.
ideal. So like, if you want to get out of debt, that seems to me an ideal and something definitely
Sure.
worth striving for.
Sure.
Are you saying to let go and just accept the debt, or
Well,
what do you
okay.
mean?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you realize that it is an ideal and that when you get out of debt, it's not going to be what you imagined.
I see. Your life's not
So,
going to be. It's not going to magically just make your life better.
right, but here's the thing. So you have this ideal you're striving for, right? This being out of debt, which is a great ideal to strive for. I'm not saying not have any ideals, because
Right.
it's impossible not to have any. But then the steps you have to take are going to be, I'm going to maybe cut back on certain things that I normally do, or maybe not go to Amazon for a month or something like that. And so these steps, you might also have an ideal about how each one is going to be great for your life. And then when you take them, they're way harder than you thought.
Yeah.
They feel like sacrifice, and so now you're struggling with this mismatch between the ideal you had for this change and the reality, which is a lot more uncomfortable than you had anticipated. And because of this mismatch, it's not that the reality is horrible. The reality of not shopping is just you're not getting some new thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that bad, but the reality of not shopping versus the ideal of not shopping is different, and you want that ideal. You were like, my life is supposed to be like Zen and perfect, and and life isn't. It's harder. It's more uncomfortable. And so now, because you want that, and you're only getting this, you're now feeling a lot of frustration, anger, disappointment, all these bad things. What Buddha calls suffering, right?
Yeah. It all
So
sounds like Yoda in The
exactly.
Phantom Menace.
So the suffering comes not from the reality of the situation, but from the mismatch between the ideal and the reality.
It's sort of expectations reality.
Exactly.
I mean, there's this equation that most of us have probably heard, that your happiness equals your reality minus your expectations, or your expectations minus your reality, however you want
Right.
to phrase it. And so,
If they match, then happiness is great.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but if reality doesn't meet your expectations, so what we need to do is not have these expectations are ideals, really.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so are plans, and so are goals, actually. They're all ideals, and there's nothing wrong with having them, but just realize that they're not going to match reality. And so what you need to do is constantly readjust what you imagine things to be to what the reality is.
Yeah,
And if you can
I
start,
think that's key. You've got to be able to readjust and adapt.
yeah. So what I found is that the bad feelings that comes from this mismatch is what stops people from doing it. So they might have missed a day, and they thought they're going to do a perfect month of this habit, right?
Yeah.
And then they miss a day, and they're like, "Oh, what happened? I didn't do what I thought I was going to do." Now they feel bad about themselves, and now that, I mean, instead of just going and doing the next day, which is, you know, the perfectly rational thing to do, we now have this emotion that comes from this mismatch of reality and ideal. This emotion like, I feel guilt, or I feel bad about myself, or I feel less trust in myself. And so then you stop doing the habit. You start going this downward spiral. You don't do it the next day because you feel bad about it. And soon you're not doing it at all, and you just feel really bad about yourself. And that's where I was in 2005. And I've actually been in that place numerous times since then. So anyway, going back to the philosophical thing, I wanted to write about acceptance and ideals, and so I wrote chapters on each one of these things. But I started reading, and I'm like, no one's going to want to read this philosophical treatise on Zen. So what I scrapped like nearly 50,000 words that I'd written.
Yeah.
And instead, I restarted the book. And now what it is, it leads people through making one small change in their life. One day at a time. Each chapter is for one day. And each day you learn some new thing about habit change, about change in general, about ideals and acceptance, one at a time. And so through the course of a month, you've actually made a change, or, you know,
Nice.
hopefully you've made some progress. But you've also learned a lot of things on dealing with change itself. And then at the last part of the book, I start showing how to apply these different lessons to life changes in general. If you lost a job, you know, lose a loved one, going through illness, all of these things that we struggle with, everyone struggles with.
Yeah.
Here is how to deal with that using the things that we learned through those first 30 days. There's another part in the book that I'm really excited about. And I got this idea from more recent programming, you know, people who code. They have these methods for managing projects. Agile programming and Scrum programming, if you're a coder and watching this. But so one of the things they do is these little sprints, a week-long sprint. So they have a plan. The plans, of course, are ideals, and they execute the plan. Then they review the plan at the end and say, how many days did we do it? What did we do compared to what we thought we were going to do? What got in the way? What were the obstacles? And so I'm doing the same thing with habits in this book, is I give you the idea of a habit sprint. So every 7 days, you're going to do a review and look at what your obstacles were. How many days did you do the habit? What got in the way? And what can you now do? What solutions can you apply to those obstacles and add them to your plan? So the plan evolves every week, and it gets better and better, adjusting to the reality, like we talked about. So this whole thing of like, if I didn't do it, this whole thing is useless. Well, if you didn't do it, but you do the review, it's not useless because you're going to get better and better over time.
Right.
And so this is a way to evolve your habit plan to fit the actual reality of your life, which is going to be different than my reality or JD's reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So that there's no other way to do that besides to adjust as you go.
Well, and I think that's smart because, as you know, one of my mottos at Get Rich Slowly has always been, do what works for you. And by that, I mean we each have different skill sets. We each have different situations. There's no one right way to solve any problem. We each got to there are some best practices that work for more people, and those are where you should start. But you shouldn't listen to anyone who tells you there's one right way to do something, because there's not. There are different approaches, and you've got to find the method that works for you. Here's the way I look at it. I feel like life is like this river, and we're all going down this river, right? And we're each in our own little boat. And too many people just let the current take them wherever it goes, and so they end up slamming into rocks and against the shore. They don't take any action to direct where their boat is headed on this river. And so what I want people to do is be more self-directed. But I also feel that once you've directed yourself to wherever you want to be in the river, it's okay to kind of let go and let the current take you until you see you've drifted a little bit too far one way. Then you've got to be a little bit goal-oriented and get back to where you were or where you need to be.
Yeah.
So that's my imperfect metaphor that I'm working on.
It's funny because I use the river as a metaphor in one of my chapters as well, and I think it's a very common metaphor and used in many different ways. So this river is doing a lot of work for us.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I see is, I mean, what I learned when I started creating Zen habits, because I was very goal-oriented in the beginning, and I I agree. Goals did help me get out of financial problems. Um, but what I learned is I had goals in the beginning of 2007 for the end of 2007. So I like at the end of the year, I was going to get to, these top 10 things, and I was going to work every day towards them. And the reality of my life changed so much during the course of that year that those goals became meaningless because they had nothing to do with what my life was now.
Yeah.
And if I had tried to stick with them, it would have been pure folly. It would have been dumb to stick with goals that I had set, back when I imagined what my life was going to be like in January.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's really just one of the key quotes in my book is the art of life lies in constant readjustment to our surroundings.
Yes.
And so goals are a fixed destination, but what if that destination is going to be, what if it's better if we go to a different destination? We don't know that until we get halfway there.
Yeah.
And so it's not about having no goals, but it's about readjusting as we go.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think being adaptable and responsive to life is key. And I want to say, again, I want to reiterate that for me, who I am, I mean, at the core, I'm the same person that I was a decade ago, but I've made some fundamental changes to my life so that my life is actually more representative of who I am. And I get the impression that you're in the same place, that you've, the improvements you've made and the continual adjustments have improved your well-being as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My life is, I actually think I'm a different person.
Oh,
I see that
interesting.
that old person has some similarities and there's definitely some commonalities, but I don't think I'm the same person as I was then, and I think I'm constantly changing.
My ex-wife, she told me, we have lunch. Chris and I are in a fairly good relationship. We have lunch every now and then, dinner, and she told me recently, she's like, JD, you are a completely different person than the person I was married to. And I don't know whether that was meant as a compliment or not. I think it was just an observation. But I will admit that who I am on the outside is absolutely different than who I was on the outside 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Sure.
But I feel like that's because it's realigned more with who I am. But I've also made adjustments. I mean, the talk I gave at World Domination Summit a few years ago was about was partly about how I've gone from being an introvert to an extrovert. And a lot of people don't believe that that's a change that can be made, but it can, and I've done that. There's still a little bit of introvert in me, but I'm much more of an extrovert.
Yeah. I think one thing that might not have changed about you is your idea of who you are at your core. Mm-hmm. Like, you can see the outside has changed, you can see that, but in the middle you think there's this still core JD that hasn't changed. But that's your idea of what the core JD is. At the heart of Zen, actually, is that core JD doesn't exist. And I scrapped that from the book because I don't think people really want to read that. Yeah. But it's just an idea of who you are, and that you think there's this inner JD, but actually inner JD is constantly changing, and so much so, kind of like the river, that you think, well, that river is the same, but actually that river is completely different water than it was 2 minutes ago. Yeah. It just looks the same.
The river bed has changed too. Because
we just have an idea of the river that has remained the same, but the river itself is completely different. And I think the inner side of us is a constantly changing river, and it only looks the same to ourselves. Wow. And to others, maybe.
That's deep stuff, Leo. That's probably a good place to end it. I know you've got to go here, and I should wrap up too. Well, thanks so much, Leo. Glad to have you as the first guest on whatever I end up calling this series of videos. It's great,
it's an honor.
And I hope maybe that we can talk again sometime in the future.
Oh, definitely. I can't wait.